In the silent theater of deep time, a story of unimaginable scale has been unfolding. It is a story written not in ink but in stone, bone, and the very code of life itself. For millennia, humanity looked out upon the breathtaking diversity of the living world, the iridescent wings of a beetle, the towering strength of an oak, the intricate dance of a hunting lion, and asked a simple, profound question: why? For most of our history, the answer was found in myth, in divine decree, in the idea of a fixed and unchanging creation. The world was as it had always been, and as it always would be. But in the 19th century, a single idea, born from a long and arduous sea voyage, would shatter this static worldview forever. It would propose that life was not a finished masterpiece, but an endless, sprawling, and often brutal work in progress. This is the story of that idea, the theory of evolution by natural selection, from its turbulent birth to its modern, molecular affirmation. Our story begins not with a revolutionary, but with a young, unassuming naturalist named Charles Darwin. Born into a wealthy English family, Darwin showed little of the intellectual fire that would later define him. He was a middling student, more interested in collecting beetles and shooting birds than in his medical studies at Edinburgh or his theological training at Cambridge. Yet, it was this passion for the natural world that set him on an extraordinary path. In 1831, an opportunity arose that would alter the course of his life and of science itself: a position as the gentleman naturalist aboard HMS Beagle, a survey ship embarking on a 5-year circumnavigation of the globe. The voyage was a revelation. As the Beagle charted the coast of South America, Darwin was not merely a passenger. He was an obsessive observer and collector. He unearthed the fossilized remains of giant, extinct mammals like the glyptodon, a creature armored like an armadillo but the size of a small car. He stood in awe of the sheer, raw power of earthquakes and volcanoes, witnessing firsthand the immense geological forces that could raise mountains and reshape continents over eons. The world, he began to realize, was not static. The land itself was ancient and in constant flux. If the stage was this old and this dynamic, what did that imply for the actors upon it? The crucial act of this drama took place in a remote volcanic archipelago 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands. Here, Darwin encountered a world that seemed almost alien. He saw giant tortoises whose shell shapes varied from island to island. He observed marine iguanas, unique in their ability to forage for algae in the cold sea. But it was a group of drab, unassuming birds that would ultimately spark his revolutionary insight. He collected specimens of what he thought were various wrens, finches, and blackbirds. It was only upon his return to England, when the ornithologist John Gould examined them, that the astonishing truth was revealed. They were all finches, but their beaks were profoundly different. Some had thick, powerful beaks for cracking hard nuts. Others had slender, pointed beaks for probing into cacti. Still others had beaks suited for catching insects. A powerful idea began to germinate in Darwin's mind. These islands were geologically young. It was plausible that a single ancestral species of finch had arrived from the mainland long ago. Over countless generations, isolated on different islands with different food sources, they had changed, they had adapted. The finches with beaks slightly better suited to the available food on their particular island were more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on those advantageous traits to their offspring over immense stretches of time. This gradual process could lead to the formation of entirely new species. It was a simple, elegant, and terrifyingly powerful mechanism. He called it descent with modification. But Darwin, a cautious and methodical man, understood the explosive implications of his theory. It directly challenged the biblical account of creation and the deeply ingrained belief in the special, separate creation of humankind. It painted a picture of nature not as a harmonious garden, but as a relentless battlefield, a struggle for existence where death and competition were the engines of creation. Fearing social ostracism and the condemnation of the church, he kept his theory a secret for 2 decades. He retreated to his study at Down House, meticulously gathering evidence, breeding pigeons, studying barnacles, and corresponding with naturalists around the world, all to build an unshakable case. He wrote a lengthy sketch of his theory in 1842 and a more detailed essay in 1844, sharing them with only a few trusted friends and leaving instructions for his wife to publish them in the event of his death. History, however, does not wait for caution. In June of 1858, a letter arrived at Down House from the other side of the world. It was from a younger naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace, who was collecting specimens in the Malay archipelago. In a fit of malarial fever, Wallace had independently conceived of the exact same theory as Darwin. He had sketched it out and sent it to the one man in England he believed would understand, Charles Darwin. The letter was a thunderbolt. Darwin was devastated, fearing that his life's work would be for nothing. His friends, the geologist Charles Lyell and the botanist Joseph Hooker, arranged a compromise. On July 1, 1858, they presented a joint paper to the Linnean Society of London, combining Wallace's essay with excerpts from Darwin's unpublished 1844 manuscript. The event itself was unremarkable. The world barely noticed, but it spurred Darwin into frantic action. He abandoned his plans for a multi-volume magnum opus and condensed his arguments into a single, powerful book. In November 1859, on the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life was published. The entire first print run sold out on the first day. The storm that Darwin had feared for so long finally broke. The book was a sensation, debated in drawing rooms, pulpits, and universities across the globe. It presented a compelling, evidence-based argument for 2 radical ideas. First, that all life on Earth was related, descended from one or a few common ancestors in the distant past, forming a great tree of life. Second, that the primary mechanism driving this diversification was natural selection. The logic was inescapable. Organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive. These offspring vary from one another. Some of these variations are heritable, and any heritable variation that gives an individual a slight edge in survival and reproduction will tend to be preserved and spread through the population over generations. It was not a conscious force. It was not a guiding hand. It was simply the inevitable outcome of variation, inheritance, and competition. The public reaction was fierce. Critics lampooned Darwin, depicting him in cartoons as an ape. The most famous confrontation occurred in 1860 at Oxford, where the Bishop of Oxford, Samuel Wilberforce, debated Thomas Henry Huxley, a brilliant and pugnacious biologist who became known as Darwin's bulldog. Wilberforce famously and unwisely asked Huxley whether it was through his grandfather or his grandmother that he claimed his descent from a monkey. Huxley's retort became legendary. He would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who used his great gifts to obscure the truth. The battle lines were drawn, but the scientific evidence was overwhelmingly on Darwin's side. The fossil record, the geographic distribution of species, the homologous structures in different animals like the similar bone structure in a human hand, a bat's wing, and a whale's flip all pointed to a shared evolutionary history. Yet, for all its power, Darwin's theory had a gaping hole. He did not know the mechanism of heredity. How were traits passed from parent to offspring? Why didn't advantageous traits simply get blended away and diluted over generations, like mixing black and white paint to get gray? Darwin struggled with this, proposing a flawed hypothesis called pangenesis. The answer, ironically, was being uncovered during Darwin's own lifetime by a quiet Augustinian friar tending his peat plants in a monastery garden in what is now the Czech Republic. Gregor Mendel, through his meticulous crossbreeding experiments, discovered the fundamental laws of inheritance. He demonstrated that traits were not blended, but were passed down in discrete units, which we now call genes. Some units were dominant, others recessive. Their inheritance followed predictable mathematical patterns. He published his work in 1866 in an obscure local journal, but its significance was completely overlooked by the scientific community. Mendel's work, which held the key to solidifying Darwin's theory, lay dormant and unread for over 3 decades. The turn of the 20th century brought the rediscovery of Mendel's laws. At first, it seemed to create a conflict. Early geneticists, focusing on the large, discrete jumps caused by mutations, thought their findings were an alternative to Darwin's idea of gradual change. But over the next few decades, a new generation of scientists, particularly the brilliant trio of R.A. Fisher, J.B.S. Haldane, and Sewall Wright, forged a powerful reconciliation. Using the language of mathematics, they showed that the continuous variation Darwin observed in nature was the result of the combined action of many Mendelian genes. They integrated genetics, paleontology, and systematics into a single, cohesive framework. This grand unification, known as the modern synthesis, finally gave Darwin's theory the solid genetic foundation it had lacked. Evolution was now defined as a change in the frequency of alleles, different versions of a gene in a population over time. Natural selection was the primary driver of this change, but other forces like genetic drift, random chance, mutation, the ultimate source of new variation, and gene flow migration also played crucial roles. The story was almost complete. The theory was robust, predictive, and supported by multiple lines of evidence. But the physical substance of heredity, the gene itself, remained an abstraction that changed in 1953 in a Cambridge laboratory. Two young scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick, building on the work of Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins, deciphered the structure of the molecule of life, deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. It was a double helix, two intertwined strands forming a twisted ladder. The rungs of this ladder were made of 4 chemical bases of T, C, and G. The sequence of these bases formed a code, a set of instructions for building and operating a living organism. The discovery of DNA was the ultimate confirmation of Darwin's vision. Here, at last, was the mechanism of inheritance and variation made tangible. We could now see how traits were passed on through the replication of this code. We could see how mutations, simple copying errors in the sequence of A's, T's, C's, and G's could arise, creating the raw material for natural selection to act upon. The tree of life was no longer just a metaphor. It was written in the genetic code of every living thing. By comparing the DNA sequences of different species, we could measure their relatedness with astonishing precision. The human genome shares about 98% of its DNA with a chimpanzee, about 92% with a mouse, and even about 50% with a banana. We carry the echoes of our shared ancestry within every cell of our bodies. Today, the theory of evolution is the bedrock of all modern biology. It is not just a theory in the colloquial sense of a guess or a hunch. In science, a theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world, confirmed through repeated observation and experimentation. Evolution is as well established as the theory of gravity or the germ theory of disease, and it is more relevant than ever. The rise of genomics has allowed us to read the story of evolution in unprecedented detail. A new field called evo-devel, or evolutionary developmental biology, has shown how small changes in a few powerful master control genes can lead to dramatic changes in an organism's body plan, explaining how a fish fin could, over millions of years, become a human hand. We can use evolutionary principles to track the spread of viruses like influenza or SARS-CoV-2 in real time, predicting their next moves and designing more effective vaccines. The urgent crisis of antibiotic resistance is a textbook case of natural selection in action, as bacteria rapidly evolve defenses against the drugs we use to fight them. Conservation biologists use evolutionary genetics to protect endangered species, and doctors use it to understand the genetic roots of human diseases. From a young naturalist's observations on a remote island chain, the idea of evolution has itself evolved. It has grown from a brilliant insight into a vast, interconnected web of knowledge enriched by genetics, paleontology, molecular biology, and countless other fields. It has given us our place in the universe, not as the pinnacle of a special creation, but as one tiny, recent twig on a 3-half-billion-year-old tree of life, connected by a shared genetic heritage to every creature that has ever lived. It is a story of immense time, of brutal struggle, of random chance, and of breathtaking creativity. It is the greatest story ever told, and it is written in our bones, our blood, and our DNA.